Welcome everyone from around the world to our China-MENA relations, looking back and envisioning the future session. We have a stimulating event planned for you today, moderated by CMED's close friend, Adel Hamazia. Adel is Committee Vice Chairman of the Oxford Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Studies Forum, where he is the co-editor of the thematic quarterly Gulf Affairs. He is an independent consultant advising governments and private sector organizations throughout the GCC and North Africa, with a focus on political risk, economic development, and public diplomacy issues. Mr. Mazie also serves as a researcher at the University of Oxford, where he previously taught Middle East politics. He was formerly a senior teaching fellow at the SOAS's Department of Financial and Management Studies. Mr. Amazia is also an associate at Global Partners Governments and an associate fellow at Chatham House. Adel?
Hello, you can all see me, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Steve. Hello, salam, ni hao, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to start by sort of thanking Steve, Manny, Samar, Emily, and especially Salome for putting this event together, the whole CMED team in short. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this fantastic panel today. We aim to explore, discuss, and better understand China-MENA relations. It's been a growing area of interest for sinologists, Arabists, and of course, more generally, business, policy practitioners, and experts alike. Before introducing the panel, I just wanted to sort of provide a few quick stats and facts. If you could bear with me 2 to 3 minutes. I don't want to be one of those moderators that goes on, but just to sort of set or quantify the scene. And then of course that would allow for a lack of perhaps duplication and some more honing in on some of the sub-regional and thematic issues we have at hand today. So I know we've got a lot of experts who are with us in the audience, but just for those that are sort of newish or newer to the Sino-MENA sort of engagement and discussion. So up until the pandemic erupted, we're talking about 152 countries signed up to BRI or Belt and Road Initiative or digital or New Silk Road rather. 21 MENA countries, 18 Arab states. Since the BRI launched, we're talking about over 100, significantly over $100 billion of investments into MENA. And according to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, the last stats that I could find, I think just before COVID. We're talking about $244 billion when it comes to the 22 Arab countries. Sino-Iranian trade at $36 billion. Sino-Israeli trade at almost $14 billion. And Sino-Turkish trade at 21. So of the $240 billion worth of oil China imported, this is before the recent drop, not the 2014 drop and not the recent drop. We're talking about of this $240 billion, around 103 or 43% came from just 6 Middle Eastern countries. So while hydrocarbons metaphorically fuel the relationship, and while some MENA states do have trade surpluses, in fact, with China, on aggregate, one could describe relations on aggregate as, in the opinion of many, as asymmetric in favor of China. So a question for the panel, perhaps, that we could approach shortly is whether we have moved from transactional to strategic. So China's recent engagement or increased interest with Middle Eastern countries is reflected in 2 key Chinese documents. One is the 2016 Arab Policy Paper, and also the 2015, and it's a very long name that I can't remember, but it's the Vision and Actions something Belt and Road or Maritime Silk Road document. And they focus on developmental peace rather than the Western notion of democratic peace. Again, an interesting question for the discussion. Just at the beginning of this month, actually, we saw a massive $2 billion prepayment deal on Iraqi oil, another interesting moment between China and MENA relations. In terms of China's Arab Policy Paper, it was released to coincide with President Xi's first presidential trip to the Middle East, and it outlined a Chinese vision for the region. And central to this is what we call the 1+2+3, and I'm not going to say 6, but we're talking about a cooperation pattern, and that's 1 representing energy, 2 infrastructure, construction, trade and investment, and finally nuclear energy, satellites and new energy sources. Now, in terms of institutionalization of this relationship or relationships. In terms of platforms, we have various plurilateral fora. We have the CASCF, that's the China Arab States Cooperation Forum. We have FOCAC, the Forum on China Forum on China Africa Cooperation, of course, relevant to from Cairo to Casablanca. And then, of course, the China GCC Strategic Dialogue, which I hope Dr. Abdulaziz, our first speaker, will mention and touch upon. However, bilateralism prevails. We've heard that before, haven't we? So we've seen a partnership, and I'm sitting in London, by the way. We've seen a partnership diplomacy approach, and that is what is sort of been used to aid Chinese economic statecraft in the region. So we've got something called comprehensive strategic partners, which China affords onto its most important partners in the region. These include Algeria, Egypt, Saudi, Iran, and of course the UAE, if I hadn't mentioned that already. So we're talking about the sort of top tier Premier League of relationships on that point. We've also seen significant engagement since the beginning of last year around the COVID-19 response between China and MENA, from PPE to of course the vaccine proper. But as MENA countries, and particularly the hydrocarbon exporters, contend with these fiscal challenges of this single or twin crises, it is, I could say unclear whether Chinese ambitions and engagements with the region continue at the pace that we had seen previously. So our panelists today will explore the strengthening economic ties between China and MENA countries, their geopolitical, their geoeconomic, their cultural, and other relations and implications. There'll be more of a focus on the GCC, if you like, the central regional powerhouse, but we'll also hear perspectives vis-a-vis North Africa and also the Chinese perspective. We'll also hear perspectives on, like I said, the political, the economic evolution, where we are today, and pun intended, the belt and road ahead. That's a good one. So with no further ado, I'd like to sort of introduce our speakers now, so it's not a sort of one by one as they come in to speak. So Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Wayshag is the GCC Assistant Secretary General for Political and Negotiation Affairs. Before this, he served as GCC Director General for International Economic Relations, Director of Economic Integration. Very interesting for me, he was also responsible for setting up the GCC Common Market, which was launched in 2008. He served as economist and legal expert at the UN and has taught at a number of US and GCC universities, including Georgetown. He writes a weekly column in Sharq al-Awsat, but also in Arab news. And he actually recently wrote an interesting piece on pillars guiding the relationship between China and MENA. We also have Miss Martina Fuchs, who is Europe business correspondent for Chinese state-run news agency Xinhua and China Global Television Network, CGTN. She's been a commentator for China Radio International, consultant and advisor at a panoply of entities and foundations, including the St. Gallen Symposium. She was at CNN Money Switzerland, is currently in Switzerland covering Davos Agenda Week. That wasn't in her bio, and has also worked as Reuters economy correspondent, among other things. She also speaks every language on the planet, and we can come to that later. Yahya Zubir is Professor of International Relations and International Management and Director of Research in Geopolitics at Kedge Business School. He's been international visiting faculty at again, a range of universities and business schools from the US through China and via Europe, published dozens of scholarly works. I mean, on the Maghreb and China-MENA, I mean, it's endless, the amount of output, which is a boon for all of us that look at this topic. He's also served as consultant for governments and companies worldwide. And last year, he was a visiting fellow at Brookings Doha Center in Qatar. Last but not least, and the person who we may have to thank the most because he's up the latest, speaking to us past midnight now, is Dr. Juzu Dwan, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the Institute for International and Area Studies at Tsinghua University. He has previously taught international affairs at Schwarzman College at Tsinghua. He was previously taught he was a former Rajawali Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and was a visiting scholar at AUC, American University in Cairo. I think we'll all agree it's a fantastic lineup. And of our four speakers, we do have two academics, but nobody's perfect. And I always make that joke. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Wayshag to sort of take us through a sort of first question, and that is, what makes China-GCC relations what they are today, and how did we get here? Dr. Abdulaziz, over to you. You have
thank you.
7 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we're approaching.
Okay. Thank you, Adel. Thank you, Salome, for organizing this, and I'm really happy and fortunate to be among these experts. The relationship between GCC and China is quite strong, actually. It has grown tremendously in a very short time. 30 years ago, there was very little diplomatic or political or economic exchanges between Saudi Arabia, for example, and China. In 1990, the two countries for the first time exchanged diplomatic relations and exchanged ambassadors. And since then, the relationship has, as I mentioned earlier, has grown quite rapidly. And I'll divide this relationship over 7 different issues and speak on each one of them for a couple of minutes. And the one is trade and investment, the most obvious. And the second is energy cooperation. And third, solidarity in dealing with COVID-19, cooperation in the post-COVID-19 economic recovery. And then how the two sides see multilateralism in light of the recent trade wars, and the political dialogue that's taking place, which is connected also to the security of the Gulf. And finally, interesting developments in the people-to-people contacts, again, quite rapidly and unexpectedly. So on trade and investment, China last year in 2020 became the top trading partner of the 6 GCC countries, over 180 billion. It's already quite impressive number. It's over 11% of the total trade exchanges of the GCC countries. But it's more impressive when you look at how it was in 1990 when Saudi Arabia and China exchanged diplomatic relations. It was then about $2 billion, so growth from 2 billion to 180. At the time, that 2% is the 2 billion amounted to only about 1% of total trade of the GCC, and I said today is over 11%. By comparison, at the time then that the trade with the United States was 15%, of the European Union was over 25%. Today, the United States is only 7%, and the European Union is about 9%. So it's quite a shift in orientation of GCC trade. Investment also, there's great appetite from both sides for investment. For us, China presents a very good market for investment in especially in the things that we can do best, which is energy, refining, petrochemicals, those sorts of things. 2 years ago, there was an investment conference here in Saudi Arabia. It attracted over 1,000 participants. About 30% of them were from China. By the end of that 2-day conference, there was about $28 billion worth of deals. And I think this is happening quite frequently these days. The second is energy cooperation. China today imports about 30% of its crude oil, and 10% of it is natural gas imports from GCC countries. China is the destination for 25% of all our chemical and petrochemical products, which are the second most important export after oil and gas. So that's quite an important relationship. As I mentioned earlier, Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries are building infrastructure in China for both oil and gas and petrochemicals and refining. The next one is actually the relationship over the 2020 and until today has gone even more closely with the experience with the COVID-19. The two regions, China and the GCC, cooperated quite closely in developing responses to the pandemic. And I think both of them are, in some ways, are success stories. Saudi Arabia has almost eradicated COVID. The numbers these days are only about 200, 150, 180 cases a day. and about 4 or 5 deaths every day from COVID, compared to the beginning of the pandemic, and also compared to some of the other countries in the region. China also started very badly on this pandemic, but moved very quickly to handle it, and I think they have done an excellent job on dealing with it, considering the huge population and the fact that for months the world and China didn't know what to do with it. So that has brought them closer together. Associated with that, the concern about how to start and accelerate economic recovery. China is our biggest customer, and we are also a significant market for Chinese products. So both sides are interested in the recovery, and they're trying to learn from each other how to accelerate that recovery from the recession. 2020 was a bad year for us here, and it was also bad for China. Our economy shrank by on average, about 6%. We expect this year, 2021, to grow by about 3%, hopefully, especially starting the second quarter. Now, so this covers the economic side of things, and then I'll touch upon the political dialogue and the discussion about multilateralism and the cultural exchanges. So, on political dialogue, China feels demonized by the media over their handling of the pandemic, and also about some other internal issues that China is experiencing related to human rights. So they're opposed to politicizing those issues, and they're seeking seeking the support of their partners, such as the GCC. On the other hand, we also have we're asking China to also live up to its commitment to international law and the UN Charter by also taking steps to address some of the excesses of the Iranian government in the region, whether it's on the ballistic missiles program, which they are spreading quite freely around the region, Hezbollah, Houthis in Yemen, and a lot of the technology came originally from China. Some of it came from other places, but quite a bit has come from China. So we're asking China to also bear some of that responsibility and try to address that issue with the Iranian government, and also with the future talks with Iran over its nuclear program. So basically, we're asking China to do 3 things. One is to address the external Iran's let's say destabilizing activities. I'm trying to choose my words here. Destabilizing activities in the region, and second, to accept the consensus that is growing that the next negotiation should be more comprehensive than the first one, should include the missiles program, and also should include Iran's regional behavior. And the third point,
Dr. Abdulaziz,
yes,
if you could start to wrap up for 1 minute, and we can come back to some of the things that you don't pick up.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and yes. So let me go to supporting multilateralism. As you probably know, China is a newcomer to the multilateral system. Joined the WTO fairly recently, but now it's a firm believer in the multilateralism, especially around the WTO, and that's good for us, and I think it's good for the world economy. And they learned their lesson. They were chastened by the trade wars they had with the United States, and they realized, and I think, the need now for a rules-based, consistent international trading system. Finally, an interesting development about the cultural exchanges between China and the GCC. Recently, there has been great interest in learning Chinese in the region, and Saudi Arabia now has decided to make it the 3rd language in the country after English and Arabic. Of course, with China, they've started teaching Arabic a long time ago, and we're working on associating with that language learning also more cultural understanding of the 2 sides. So thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful intro, Dr. Abdulaziz. I think we'll come back to some of the issues around language, culture, and the perhaps limits and opportunities around the soft power both ways. We'll now fly from Riyadh to Zurich, I believe, in Switzerland. And we have Martina Fuchs, who'll take us through a little more on her perspectives with respect to GCC-China relations and also some of the investment and sectoral areas, as well as challenges around culture, language, and so on. Martina, 7 minutes, over to you.
Masal Khair, Wan Shanghao, 7 minutes. That is very precise and very Swiss greetings from Zurich. Thank you very much for the invitation, Adel, and this very, very timely and important panel today. I would like to focus my opening statement on the fact that I believe we are only at the very beginning of China's influence in the GCC, that the big windfall for investments, especially in infrastructure in the region, in the Gulf, will yet come. We are not quite there yet. It's still very at the infant stage, but that cultural, linguistic, and religious challenges will rise. I would like to give a little bit of context, a little bit of a framework before we deep dive more in this panel, focusing first of all on the first key area of oil and gas. As you mentioned, Adel, in 2014, the Chinese President Xi Jinping laid out the framework of the hydrocarbon cooperation with the GCC, with the 1+2+3 framework. Energy was identified as the first pillar of this cooperation, including technical cooperation in the area of renewable energy, nuclear energy, as well as space. Then in 2017, the GCC already accounted for 27% of China's oil imports. And that year in 2017, China also overtook the United States as the biggest, the world's largest oil importer. So that was really kind of a turning point, 2017. So energy trade and Chinese investment in the GCC's energy infrastructure is also going to increase further from here, I believe. Then the second key area, of course, is infrastructure. You've mentioned the ports, for example, in the UAE, the Khalifa port, there's the Duqm port in Oman, there is Ain Sokhna in Egypt, there is Port Said as well in Egypt that I've visited, or in Saudi Arabia, we have the port of Jizan. So all of these infrastructure projects are also going to multiply further. Of course, governments in the region, for them, it's great for economic diversification. They love these investments. It's also giving a boost for the construction sector, of course. In 2018, at the China Arab States Cooperation Forum in Beijing, China has pledged back then already $23 billion in loans and development aid to the region. So I expect this to increase even further from here. For that, of course, we need trade finance. It's been very interesting to see when I lived in Dubai from 2008, the Dubai debt crisis, exactly that moment, to 2012, to really see the development of trade finance happening. I remember to visit the ICBC's headquarters back then. It was a tiny office. They launched it in 2008. It was the first time that actually a Chinese financial institution set up shop in the Middle East. And now it's been obviously rapidly growing and expanding, not just ICBC, but other Chinese lenders, of course, as well. This is, of course, for foreign exchange, but also to diversify the financing options, yuan financing, for example. The UAE and China have also set up a yuan clearing center in the UAE in 2015, and the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and the Central Bank of the UAE signed a currency swap agreement as well to finance more trade and investments in infrastructure, for example. Then there is the level of technical cooperation. I believe we will see many more partnerships and cooperation deals, especially in the nuclear and solar energy sectors, because we know that President Xi Jinping has announced at the UN General Assembly in September that China wants to become carbon neutral by 2060. So of course there's a lot of cooperation potential between China and the GCC. We've seen new green energy strategic partnership announced in 2018. So that is definitely the future for the bilateral relationship going green. But as I mentioned at the very beginning, I believe that culture will be a crucial factor. As Dr. Abdelaziz has said, we need more exchange, we need more cultural understanding. When I lived in Dubai, I saw the first China language center being established in Dubai. I believe that now at the NYU in Abu Dhabi, there are more language classes happening as well. I know there is a Confucius Institute in Dubai. There is the Al Musharrif Chinese School that opened in Abu Dhabi in 2010. There is the Zayed University and the Beijing Foreign Studies University that signed a cooperation and educational partnership agreement in 2012. And vice versa in China, there are some 40 institutions offering Arabic classes, but really we need, of course, much, much more. Both languages, as a linguist, I can tell you, are like the hardest in the world to learn, but it's obviously a challenge that we have to take, and it's fun and a great pleasure to learn those languages. I would like to focus lastly on one event.
In 1 minute, Martina, if you can.
One Swiss minute, Adel. That is
Tissot or Rolex is fine, please.
I have no Rolex, but I have this watch. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is going to hold its 6th annual meeting this year in nowhere else but Dubai, from October 27th to the 28th. And I do believe that this is a geopolitical decision as well, a milestone, event happening in the GCC that is going to be simultaneously held together with the Dubai Expo, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Martina. Very interesting points. I think we'll come back to maybe the greening the belt. How is the belt, the digital or the Silk Road going to be woven into MENA? And of course, very interesting points on the role of language going forward. We now move from Zurich and we take a car through Bern, through Lausanne, through Geneva, and we cross the border to the south of France, where we invite Professor Zubair to tell us a little bit about a region which maybe doesn't have as much wealth per capita as the GCC, but still remains a very important part of the BRI and China's positioning and planning for MENA, Africa, Mediterranean, and the like. Yahya, in 7 minutes, if you could take us through the evolution of these relations, but also if you could tell us a little bit about where we are in the roadmap ahead. Yahya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adel. First, I'd like to thank UCLA, the CMED, the Center for Middle East Development, for the kind invitation. Of course, as you put it, Adel, the Maghreb does not compare to the GCC in terms of volume or what have you, but it's the same story in the sense that China prefers to deal with each country individually. That is, bilateral relations dominate over any kind. China does not have any regional perspective, just like either the United States or Russia, for that matter. In any case, there is a lot of talk, though, that the Chinese are somehow coming to the Maghreb and to dominate the Maghreb. I'd like to say at the onset that there is nothing of that, in the sense that, first of all, China has been with the Maghreb for a long time. Contacts with the Maghreb began before the era of independence from the Bandung era in 1955. But it has evolved, and then it had a period of, if you wish, or where the relations were not as developed and so on. But when you talk about the Maghreb, as far as Sino-Maghreb relations, we need to focus on Algerian Maghreb relations for historic reasons, because China was the first non-Arab country to recognize the Algerian provisional government in 1958. So it's a long history, but the Maghreb has become of great interest, economically, but also geopolitically, because the Maghreb is very close. I mean, it's in the Mediterranean. That's quite an important consideration, but it's also very close to the to Europe, and it's a gate to sub-Saharan Africa, where China has tremendous interest. So this region, though it's not strategic in itself, is of interest to Beijing. And if you try to understand why the Maghreb states show that much interest to China, it is to basically diversify and to attract, foreign direct investments from China. It's not enormous, but Algeria was basically the main beneficiary in the Maghreb. Within a period of, say, 14 years or so, Algeria had attracted about 23 point something billion dollars in investment. And if you look, all the countries in the Maghreb have joined the BRI, which is of interest to them. They have joined also the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So that is also some sort of development. I cannot get into the reasons for the Maghreb states why they have made that choice in terms of diversifying, but I would argue that since the so-called Arab Spring or the Arab uprisings, this has intensified in the sense that the Maghreb states appreciate the non-interference policy of China. So where are most of the relations of the Maghreb states? Well, with Algeria, they cover almost every sector. They cover political relations, economic, and very important economic relations, and so on and so forth. But it is expanding with the other countries. As far as Algeria is concerned, actually for the three of them, when I talk about Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, the trade is not important. Dr. Abdelaziz mentioned $180 billion in the trade volume with the GCC. The Maghreb, and if we add Egypt, would be less than $30 billion. And of course, the balance is always in favor of China. If you look at the trade, I can give you the figure. In 2019, for instance, the China's exports to the Maghreb amounted to about less than 14 billion, 13 something, and the imports were about 1 billion, a little bit over $1.5 billion. So that gives you an idea. And if you compare, for instance, the trade volume between the Maghreb and Europe, you will see it's even, it's minuscule in that sense. However, if we look at what China has done in the Maghreb, it's considerable in terms of infrastructure, especially in Algeria, where you had since the early 2000s the housing, for instance, constructions or bridges, airport, hotels, the famous East-West highway, and so on. These were extremely important. And I believe that in the post-COVID era, it's going to be even more important because there are some projects and there are some political reasons as well that we can discuss during the Q&A. Same thing with Morocco. Morocco, since 2016, Morocco, by the way, has a strategic partnership with China, not as important as the comprehensive strategic partnership with Algeria. But at the same time, Morocco too has attracted some interest on the part of China because, again, its proximity to Europe. But there have also been some major agreements since 2016, particularly in Tangier with the Tangier Med and so on, with the construction of bridges. Same thing. It's again revamping the infrastructure of all these countries because the Maghreb states themselves are very much interested in having an economic takeoff.
Just wrapping up, Dr.
Yes, okay.
1 minute.
Tunisia is a little bit less, so I would not go much into Tunisia. The investments in Tunisia are less than $100 million, but there are still some agreements in the making. In terms of soft power, the three countries are teaching the Chinese language. Morocco and Tunisia both have Confucius centers, whereas Algeria has classrooms in universities, and there is an important some greater interest happening now in learning the language. There's the presence also of the media, Chinese media, just like China Daily is available, for instance, in various places. Now, the attraction and the attractiveness of China to the Maghreb people has also gone up, except in Algeria, and we can discuss the reasons why, because that's a topic in itself to understand why Algeria, which has the closest relationship with China in terms of acceptance of China, has a lower percentage, which is about 34%, whereas Tunisia is 65% and Morocco is about the same. So we will get, we need to have some sort of explanation. If you allow me, Adel, just 2 seconds in terms of during the COVID-19, the three countries benefited from they helped China in the beginning, and they benefited from China's assistance, which sent, masks and the respirators and so on and so forth. And what is interesting to conclude with is that the three countries have opted partially for the Chinese anti-COVID-19 vaccine, which gives an idea of the sort of trust, or at least the closing of the closer relations that have developed in recent years. And my expectation is that in the post-COVID-19, the relations will be even closer, and there will be more projects, particularly in Sino-Algerian relations. Thank you, Adel.
Thank you so much, Yahya. And it's a very interesting point you make on the poll. I think it was the Arab Barometer you were referring to. And it's ironic that the two countries which are closest to China in North Africa, that their people have the lowest opinion. And here I refer to Egypt alongside Algeria. Before we fly to Beijing and consolidate 7-8 hours into a few seconds, I'd just like to ask everybody who is participating in the audience, if you could start to submit questions as we go along. Marhaba, bienvenue, please do. But if you could just sort of share your name, country, and affiliation, that would be fantastic. And we'll try to cluster them, consolidate, and complement in due course. Last but not least, we go to China, 20-1 in Beijing. And I'd like to invite Dr. Juzu Duan, a friend and colleague, to say a little bit about the Chinese perspective on MENA. We've been hearing things a little bit eastwards. We want to hear things sitting in the east, looking west. Economic statecraft, and I know you spent time in Egypt. Anything on the sort of China-Egypt relation would be a sort of bridging factor, no pun intended, when it comes to Maghreb and Al-Khalij, and we can cross the Red Sea like Moses did, but the other way. Dr. Juzu, marhaba.
Yeah, thanks, Adel. And I want to also thank the Center for Middle East Development, UCLA, for the kind invitation and arrangement. I really appreciate the opportunity to exchange ideas on the China-MENA relation, especially during the pandemic times. So I will briefly introduce my understanding of how China look at the MENA region, and maybe take the China-Egypt relation as a case study later. So as many people pointed out, that China carries no negative historic burden in the MENA region because China have no colonial or imperial historical record in the region. And that is why China could build a balanced relationship with different countries in the region. However, in my opinion, this also means China is culturally and politically distant from the MENA region. Although there is a rich historical record of Chinese contacts with the Western Asian region in earlier times, but those are too distant to affect the contemporary cultural connectivity. So according to my own observation, ordinary Chinese people do have a huge interest in the Middle East affairs. If you talk to a Beijing taxi driver, they can talk all the way about the Iranian issues, Syria civil war, or the Yemen civil war. But I think that is basically due to the intense media coverage of the war and conflict there, as it has been the center of global politics for the long time since the Cold War. However, I think Chinese people in general don't show strong interest in meddling its own country in the MENA politics. I think there are probably two reasons for that. So one is that they see the region as a political quagmire. Big powers like the US and Russia have failed to handle the situation, while China will have the same destiny if it intervenes politically or militarily. Another reason is that, not like the Western countries' attachment to Middle East Christian or a Jewish population, China lacks religious incentive to be part of the MENA politics. Also, in terms of the national security, the MENA region is also not China's major concern. Right now, China is over-occupied with challenges and threats from its neighboring countries. For example, the cross-border terrorism is mostly cutting routes from Central Asian and Southeast Asian countries to China. So those countries' stability constitutes a big part of China's own security. And China also faces potential war or armed conflict in borders with India. The two countries have constant exchange of fires in recent years. So I don't see China has a willingness or the capacity to deliver political or security public goods to the MENA region in the foreseeable future. That has been said, the MENA region still matters in China's global vision in two ways. The first is a similar political view shared by China and MENA countries on global order or domestic governance. So both China and MENA countries emphasize on rich historical heritage, which was broken by the colonial intervention, and they are bounded by shared anti-colonial attitudes that all identify themselves as developing countries with third world, or they want to seek a proper place in the global economic and political order. And also in terms of domestic governance, most of the MENA countries and China support each other on the sovereignty issues and reject the imposition of Western values on their society and domestic politics. And the second is that the MENA region is an important trading partner with China. The composition of China's imports from the Middle East is almost 90% accounted by oil and gas over the past 20 years, which has a strategic significance to China. Although China had attempted to diversify its energy sources, China will retain a strong interest in purchasing oil and gas from the region. Also, for the Middle Eastern countries, they will also wish to maintain and develop further size and vitality of their export market in China. We should also consider the current market size of the MENA countries, with the GCC countries entering the high income level and Turkey to the middle income level. Chinese exports to the region is expected to increase in the future, and it will not limit to daily customs and electronic products, but also in some new fields. For example, e-commerce, online gaming, electric cars, etc. And China also have initiated to have a joint investment with GCC countries in a third market, like African countries and Southeast Asian countries. And as others suggested, I will also take China-Egypt relation as an example of a cooperation between China and MENA country. In the contemporary history, Egypt is the first Arab and African country to build diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China in 1956. So also because Jamal Abdel Nasser was one of the leaders of the Third World, and his personal friendship with then Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai China gives its relation with Egypt a lot of emphasis. For example, during the Cultural Revolution, China withdrew most of its diplomats from the MENA region, but still keeps its embassy in Cairo as a liaison in the region. So in current times, the bilateral relation is more economic than ideological as it used to be. The economic cooperation between China and Egypt has a strong recognition and support from the elites of both countries. As far as Egypt is concerned, China's Belt and Road Initiative provides an opportunity for Egypt to better achieve its national strategic goals in terms of financial resources and technology. As the President sees its major goal is to rebuild its country and achieve economic growth. It is worth mentioning that in 2014, the Egyptian government established the China Affairs Groups inside the cabinet, directly led by its prime minister, in order to promote and implement political and economic cooperation between China and Egypt. For China, I think Egypt is special in two ways.
1 minute, Jesus.
Okay, minute, I'm going to conclude very soon. So Egypt is a natural Afro-Euro-Asia country with its substantial influence in the Arab world and Africa, which makes China has to consult with Egypt on many regional affairs. And this is also a psychological factor that not so many people have mentioned before. So like China, Egypt is an ancient agricultural civilization with a huge homogeneous population and limited natural resources. So if there is a China model for economic growth, I think in many Chinese people's mind, Egypt should be one of the countries that could replicate the model. China is now an important partner with Egypt in terms of infrastructure, technology transfer, and personnel training. Maybe I don't have enough time to get into details, but let's leave it to the discussion and Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Juzu. I think that was a wonderful first round. I think we provided the metaphorical scaffolding for the conversation and for the discussion. I'm going to put forward a couple of questions, and then we're going to sort of open up for Q&A with the audience, who I understand are tuning in from several countries, which is fantastic and much appreciated. So I sort of want to come back initially to Dr. Abdulaziz, the sort of first question for you, if I may. And I was hoping you're at the GCC. In May, we reach 40 years. So, of course, multilateralism, plurilateralism, regional organizations are something that you're very keen on and work towards. Could you say a little bit about whether, for example, the GCC China strategic dialogue, in your opinion, if you like, complements or contradicts or conflicts with country level agendas? And the reason I say that is we have seen an emergence in recent times of a sort of intra-GCC competition for investment and financing going forward. And I think you'll agree with that. How do you sort of, navigate around this as somebody who works at such organization?
Well, I mean, competition is a good thing. And we have discussed within the GCC whether to harmonize or unify the sort of the perks we can give to outside investors. And the decision was, no, leave it to the market and let countries compete, cities compete, even individual projects compete about what they can offer to outside investors. So I think there is plenty of room for investment in all the GCC countries by Chinese investors and vice versa. And I mentioned a couple of examples where the GCC countries have invested in China, and the Chinese market is a big market. What I should mention here is that we are engaged in free trade area negotiations now for about 10 years. The Chinese are tough negotiators. I think in 2019, there was a breakthrough that I think is going to enable us, hopefully, to conclude the deal maybe in this year, in 2021. The breakthrough had to do with China abandoning some of its protectionist policies towards petrochemicals in particular, and that's really the main product after oil. So I think once we conclude this agreement, the agreement has a lot of provisions about market access, penetration by investment on both sides will be quite brisk, I think, especially in the Chinese market, because our markets are quite open and eager to get investment from outside. But China, on the other hand, manages its market quite closely, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdulaziz. I'm not going to go in the same order, so I'm not coming to you, Martin. I'll come back to you just a second, Juzu. I have a tough, difficult question for my dear friend and brother, Dr. Yahya. And I hope, are you ready, Dr. Yahya, for my difficult question? Perhaps. Perfect. So there are very few leaders, I think, on the planet will agree that could fly from Cairo to Riyadh to Tehran, right? President Xi did that a few years ago. And this idea of sort of non-interventionism, it's a question I always ask when we sort of have these discussions is, do we get diminishing returns on non-interventionism? And to be more specific, I'm going to Maghribify the question for you, Dr. Yahya, and make it give you a really difficult one. And it is, Algeria and China are close. Algeria and Morocco are quote unquote rivals, competitors, whatever you want to call it. If China starts engaging in the Western Sahara, what does Algeria say to that? And where do we go with that? And there is a sort of idea, and I speak to Moroccan friends and counterparts, and they sort of bring up the idea that China can't support territorial separatist or nationalist or autonomous movements because of its own challenges back home. Not to answer the question for you, but Yahya, thoughts on that more generally?
Okay. I can tell you, based on research, serious research, one of the disappointments that Algeria has with China is the question of Western Sahara, because they believe that that China is wrong in its assumptions, in confusing the question of Western Sahara, which is a question of decolonization, and China knows it well, with you use the term separatism, which it is not. Western Sahara is not a question of separatism, but there are reasons to believe that from Beijing's perspective, there is the idea, or they have heard it from the Moroccan side, where there is a sort of identification of that question with Tibet. And there's fear that Morocco would raise the question of not only Tibet, but also of Xinjiang. And that is why. And sometimes at the United Nations, at the Security Council, China gives this impression of floating. It abstains in general, but it does not take a clear position on the conflict, talks about political solution and so on and so forth, but it does not recognize, for instance, or does not deal with the Polisario. The only time, to my knowledge, when China showed something was a couple of years ago, when it gave money to the Sahrawi Red Crescent. Unlike Russia, for instance, has a dealing with the Polisario. The Polisario can, Sahrawi representatives can go to Moscow and they're received in the Duma, in the parliament, and so on and so forth. So that is a big, when you interview Algerian officials, you have that feeling of almost betrayal on the part of China. But it has not affected the question to a point where it would have poisoned relations between the two, since Algeria always suggests that the question should be dealt with at the United Nations. And, the Chinese have not done what President Trump did on December 10th, for instance.
Dr. Yahya, I think we have a two-finger before we go to Martina. Dr. Abdulaziz, did you want to come in again?
Yes, there's one of the areas that we have agreement with China is really we're against separatism, and we respect borders, and if you see, that's consistent now with China. Long time ago in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, China had a different view, and they actually supported revolutionary movements and separatist movements where it served their purposes. But now they're committed to that principle. But we see a contradiction between that principle that China itself would like to respect regarding its own territory when it comes to its position or its actions in the region. For example, they haven't really criticized Iran for encroaching on Iraqi sovereignty, or Syrian or Lebanese or other countries. They're shy about expressing their views. While they commit themselves, and they're quite strong about it, they do not get involved in criticizing other countries when they do interfere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now go to Martina, and I'm not picking on you on languages because of your polyglot abilities, but my sort of question is, it's nice. We heard about curriculum. We heard about Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisian, Egyptian traders and learning Chinese as part of their exploits when going over to Guangzhou, moving from suitcases to containers. But my question around the soft power piece is, I want to hear more about the limits. Do you know of Western scholars or Arab scholars or scholars from the region who their life goal is to go, with all due respect, to Beidong or to Tsinghua? Or is it still great institutions like UCLA, the Princetons, the Harvards, the NYUs, the Columbias? I'm saying that because one of our colleagues studied there, and also the Oxbridges and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on that, and any other elements of this sort of soft power exchange?
Absolutely, we do need more such exchange. Of course, there is a lack of academic programs that focus on, the issue of bilateral relations between China and the Middle East, the GCC in specific. Of course, the academic institution we are talking to today, the University of California, is a great exception. We know that Tsinghua, where Qiu Chou is teaching, and Beida are, of course, the best universities in China. We also have Jiaotong in Shanghai, we have Fudan University, but they're not known in the Middle East, or only those. But of course, it is a challenge that the young people should take to go to other less known universities if they really want to understand China, and vice versa, the Chinese students as well. I was thinking that maybe with the bigger influence that China has in the GCC and more opportunities also in technology and energy, that there will be more student exchange. There needs to be more programs offered by universities, but it is of course a face issue. It is of course a reputation issue that both countries and regions need to work on. It is still the UK, the US, and Australia that are leading the pack when it comes to attracting Chinese universities. But I think we will see a slow but steady rise. Dr. Abdelaziz, you were just raising your hand.
After you.
Yeah. We need also more tech startup investments, I believe, not just academic programs, but really focusing on impact hubs, more exchange between young startup entrepreneurs, KOLs, more events. Of course, it is difficult right now because from a cultural perspective, I have experienced that both the Chinese and the Arabs, they really appreciate the physical contact, the face-to-face to establish trust. The Wasta in the Middle East, the Guanxi in China, they really need the physical encounter, and we cannot do this on Zoom, on Woof, on Tencent meetings, or any other app.
Thank you so much, Martina. Because some of my question for Dr. Zhu has been covered by colleagues in the audience, we'll now move to our many participants in the audience who are sending in incredible questions, which I think is testament to the interest in the topic at hand. And what we're going to try and do, if I may ask our speakers to short, robust answers so that we can get through as many. So breadth over depth, I'm afraid. And I'm going to start with a question for Dr. Zhu from Professor Robert Springborg from Vancouver. And he says that you stated that the Chinese model would be appropriate for Egypt in your opening remarks. Could you sort of elaborate and tell us what that model is and what its manifestations might be like in Egypt? Dr. Duan, over to you.
Oh yeah, thanks for the question. I think I haven't been thinking through the question myself very deeply, but I will tell you what I already in my mind now. I think for the Chinese perspective, we will always think that any country, any late developing country that could be become an industrial country in the future is a country with a huge population and limited resources, just like China, like Japan, like South Korea, because those countries have no choice but to develop their own industry, to cultivate the employment for their own people. So we can see that the rentierism is a very big feature in the MENA region, but maybe Egypt or Turkey, well, maybe Algeria, maybe Egypt and Turkey will be an exception of the rentierism, because those countries have a huge population and with limited resources. So I think Egypt, after several decades of wandering between development models, now they know what they need for their own development. I think first is infrastructure. You will see the Egyptian military and the government is quickly develop the roads and the railways in their own country, and upgrade the telecommunication and other infrastructure even in Sinai Peninsula. I think from Chinese experience, that's a very right step to develop the economy in the future. And also it is gaining investment on the production of manufacturing and jobs. It's in the right direction, I can see, but maybe not in the very right or quick speed now. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Juz. I think there may have been some other aspects around surveillance, etc., that could have been included, but we'll move on. A difficult question for Dr. Abdulaziz. It is it's not targeted at you, but the GCC is in the question. From Ersin Kalay Çayoglu, I hope I said that correctly, from Turkey. 3 questions in one, but I'll go to the last, and it is: have the Saudi government or the GCC had any conversation with the Chinese government about the status and treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
Yes. In all our partnerships, we discuss issues like this, but we refrain from publicly commenting on them. I think there were a couple of exceptions. In 2009, we issued a statement about the crushing of a demonstration in Urumqi in Xinjiang. But other than that, most of our exchanges were about were private. On the treatment of the Muslim community in China, we have listened to the Chinese explanations, but we haven't said anything publicly, because we prefer to deal with those issues through the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It deals, as one of the main issues of its mandate is the treatment of Muslim minorities around the world, and all of our member states are members of the OIC, and we have regular discussions with the OIC about this issue. We're very concerned, but as I said, in a strategic relationship like this one with China, we prefer to quiet diplomacy rather than public denouncements.
Thank you. So the questions are coming in hard and fast. So quick questions, quick answers. Yahya or Martina, if you want to pick up on this one. And it's a question from Dave Pollock from the US. And he asks, how does China view the Arab-Israeli normalization? And how will that affect Chinese relations with the countries directly involved or with others in the region or beyond? So challenges or synergies, thinking tech, but also thinking, where Palestine fits into all of this.
Go ahead, Martina.
You were giving me the floor. I will keep it very short, and then you could maybe answer as well. I have really seen a very, very strong interest in Chinese-Israeli relations. There have been a lot of business deals, a lot of exchange, a lot of events happening in China when I was there, really focused on chips, on artificial intelligence, also surveillance, tools and so on, military exchange, I believe. So I think this is only the beginning for sure. But in terms of the peace agreement that we have between Israel.
Sorry, Martina, can I ask a question? Juzu could maybe, did it feature much in the press in Beijing, the normalization?
Not too much, I believe. What have you?
Too much, yes.
No. No,
Yeah.
but I join Martina in what she said. The relationship between Israel and China has grown exponentially, especially in the area of innovation and all. They have a special partnership related to technology and so on and so forth. However, I would say that the Chinese would not be against normalization as long as they can stand to their position on the two-state solution and on the Palestinian question. So they don't see much of a contradiction in this sense. So they can, if they feel that there is a movement towards a resolution of the conflict, or that the Palestinian question is still on the table, I think the Chinese will go along like they did when they see the Arabs moving in a certain direction. The Chinese tend to align with that position without making any waves, and that's how it is. But I think they would still stick to the Palestinian question because they know at the end of the day that the Palestinian question is not going to disappear.
Thank you. I'm going to merge two questions. So we go from a question in the US to Moscow via London. And we have a question from Alice Gower at Azure Strategy. And she asks, are we likely to see increased cooperation on nuclear or increased nuclear tech sales from China to MENA as a sort of MENA regional response to a more stringent US administration? We saw the news yesterday from the Biden admin vis-a-vis UAE and Saudi. And Nikolai Surkov from Moscow similarly asks, can China become a security provider for MENA states? It is for some, in some ways, but especially in the Gulf. And is it likely to become a major arms supplier, replacing, maybe a strong word, the US or Russia? Who'd like to touch on that? Dr. Abdelaziz.
I can talk only because I wrote with my my dear colleague, Dr. Sun Degong. China is not, it likes the situation it sees in the Middle East, where the US is still the provider of security. It will be a good, I mean, in sales, weapons, and so on, it will gladly do that, regardless of the conflict or the nature of the conflict. But I don't think it is in a position right now or a desire to really deal with that, even when it is asked by the very same countries being involved in a conflict. I saw that there was a question, Adel, if you allow me, on Libya. Look at the position on Libya, where the Chinese are positioning themselves in the post-conflict to go into the economic aspect of it, just like it's doing for Syria. But it prefers to stay away from trouble. That's not, even when we coined the term quasi-mediation, China does not even play the role of a mediator. It's not a fully engaged mediator in any kind of conflict, except there was only one conflict. This is the one at its border. That is the nuclear deal with Korea. That's the only the negotiations. But as far as the Middle East and North Africa are concerned, it does not get involved and it stays away from that. But it does sell weapons. That is, you know, it's a lucrative market, and there are many countries, and I can talk about Algeria now, is getting weapons, the sophisticated weapons. Not Algeria is traditionally the purchaser of Russian weapons for historical reasons, but China is moving, especially in Africa and all, in terms of selling weapons. It is a big market for it.
Dr. Abdelaziz, Saudi is one of the largest importers of weapons. Where does China fit into the equation? And we've heard a little bit about drone factories. Any other comments on where things are?
Actually, I raised my hand to talk about the larger issue of the Gulf security. I don't see China as getting involved in Gulf security in a direct way, as long as the United States and the GCC countries have sufficient protection for both their trade with the GCC and their oil imports. It's basically they're getting free service from this arrangement, this architecture that's really features United States plus the GCC. Now, if something changes and they feel that their trade and their oil imports are threatened, I can see them trying to get involved. We already see them in the Gulf of Aden, for example, and in Djibouti. But for the time being, I think the value of China, as I mentioned in my opening comments, is really in the diplomatic area, and they can play a great role there.
Thank you. Dr. Juzu, you touched on Egypt. It's a country you've lived in. We have a question from Egypt, from Huda Awad, and she asks, what are the implications of the Silk Road / BRI, particularly on the infrastructure in the ports such as Sharm and Port Said? And of course, you could even include the new administrative capital in that conversation. Any comments?
I think China is just one of the major investors in Egypt, not even the top 10. I think majorly the GCC countries and European countries invest a lot in Egypt, but maybe those investments are not so much in the infrastructure. Maybe Germany is an exception, build some power plants in Egypt. So I think China's major focus in Egypt is infrastructure, like the ring road, around Cairo, a big Cairo city, and also the iconic towers and the CBD areas of the new administrative capital. But also, I think Chinese investment or cooperation with Egypt also involves some high-tech fields. Maybe I will go back to the former question, about the nuclear energy cooperation. I think about the nuclear energy cooperation and maybe about the space technology. Those big powers are not in a monopolistic position towards the MENA country, like China has, Russia has, and also the United States or European countries has. For example, for Egypt, China and Russia is competing for building a nuclear power plant in Egypt, but finally Russia wins. But on the other side, the Egyptian government also give the cooperation on the space satellites cooperation and the power energy cooperation to China. So I think also, for example, the UAE choose South Korea to build the power plant, and Saudi Arabia choose China. So it's for the local country own choice to choose between those big powers rather than the big powers, some kind of monopolistic strategy into this region. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. Martina, coming back to the sort of soft piece, one thing that's very important for the region, particularly the non-oil sector, for the hydrocarbon exporters, but also for the Moroccos, the Tunisias, the Egypts, the Lebanons, the Jordans, is tourism. And we have a question from David Lloyd at International Market Management, I believe in London. And he asks, what evidence do you have of two-way tourism? Because he thinks that's where the strengthening of cultural ties really lies. So, of course, we know, Morocco and Egypt have been competing, but Chinese who go to Dubai. Where is this going? And what do you see as a sort of roadmap ahead in that space?
Well, it all depends on the COVID pandemic situation, of course, when we can start flying again. I was just interviewing IATA, the International Air Travel Association boss, de Juniac, before he steps down, and he's very, very pessimistic about the outlook, but hopefully in the middle of this year we can finally kick off and take a plane again. I mean, the Chinese, of course, had as a first destination always Dubai for shopping and the tax-free, economy and so on in mind, and not really the beaches of Algeria, Tunisia, and so on. But this might change in the future if there are more travel packages. If you look at the offerings of Ctrip, for example, the Middle East is not really, a top destination so far. But with, more airports being built in China, and of course the rising middle class in China, there's also a shift in appetite when it comes to travel among the Chinese. Of course, we all remember the big Chinese groups coming to Europe and so on, but there's much more individual travel now, younger people, going on a shoestring to different countries. But probably not yet the explore or adventure travel that we have in mind. I mean, for example, I'm going to Socotra in Yemen in just 2-3 weeks time, and I don't think I will yet see a Chinese tourist there on the island, but you know, there will be change as well.
Thank you, Martina. We had a question from Hussein Malik from Tehran, which was specifically directed at Dr. Juzu around the volume of armament sales to MENA, and you know, technology fits into that. I don't expect you to have numbers at hand, but I want to broaden the question, if I may. This is on the record, but I was earlier today, I was on a Chatham House rules roundtable, and we had a regional foreign minister from MENA, from the GCC. I think I can go that far and say that. And he said something very interesting, and I'd love reactions from both of you know, from everybody on the panel. And I quote, and I wrote this down. So two mini quotes. China makes it happen. China has emerged as the strategic go-to partner. We have vaccinated millions, not possible without China, which would be not possible without China. Pfizer only sent 100,000 supply. Moreover, he says, if you say don't buy Chinese technology, what is your alternative? 5 times more expensive or strings attached? So thinking about the Bainet admin, who I'm sure will be a little bit more subtle than the previous admin when it comes to this sort of US-China tech sort of discussion, or the hue and cry over Huawei. Dr. Abdulaziz, for example, a lot of the vision programs from NEOM to Silk City in Kuwait, they're only viable possibly with sort of Chinese speed and cost. What could this do to the relationship with the US? You know, how are the countries sort of thinking about this? We even saw Pompeo lean on even a closer ally in Israel. Any thoughts on that? And if any of the other colleagues have any additions, you know, please do.
Well, yeah, this issue comes up all the time. And today, actually, I had a meeting with the US officials, and I think they understand our position. And there is no contradictions. The United States, let's be very clear, the United States is our strategic partner on security, on all issues. I mean, trade with the United States has declined because the United States produces its own oil. But on all other issues, we rely on that partnership with the US, provide Gulf security and military support and all of that, training. So I think everybody understands. China understands that our close alliance with the United States, and the United States also understands our interests. And I wouldn't go as far as the person that you mentioned. I think I probably know who it is, you know. But I think the diversifying our security partners is a good thing. But we still, I think the lion's share is still with the United States. And if we do anything with China, it will be in coordination, in close coordination with the United States and with their consent, not against it.
Thank you. Do we have any, Juzu, please? Yes, please do.
May I jump in on this question? Because I also do some field work or interviewing in Kuwait and the Silk Road City. And also we invited Sheikh Nasser, the late Sheikh Nasser, to China for the promotion of the city, you know, for the Chinese SOEs, you know, managers. So I think one of the reasons for the Kuwait to choose China as a major partner for the city is that China's volume of the trade and also the ability of investment is very huge. That's just one side. Another side, as it told me in person, is that China is a neutral factor in the region. If there is an American flag or maybe British flag on the island or on the Silk Road City, you know, the neighbor country will be annoyed, like Iran or Iraq. But if there's a China flag and Chinese flag will coincide flag, everyone will be happy. They will think that the city is very neutral to do business. But I think they face some, you know, unsolved challenges is about the connectivity with Iraq. The Kuwaiti envoy have visited Iraq several times, but the internal, you know, conflict cannot be solved to finalize the railway building connecting the Silk City across Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean Sea. So we will see what happens next. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Juzu. A question for Yahya and Martina, and to pick up on the minister who I'd mentioned's comments. And I know Yahya has written a great paper on this. is there a sense of pride, do you think, from the Chinese side, or is this just economic statecraft at its best, or diplomatic statecraft when it comes at its best, when it comes to this pandemic diplomacy or this health Silk Road diplomacy? Who wants to sort of pick up upon that? Martina, Yahya?
Ladies first, always.
You're too kind. Shukran. So I do believe that we will see much more of this diplomacy. We've seen that, I remember so well, like Jack Ma and Alibaba sending all the PPE.
Jack Ma, where is he?
Yeah. And
I haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah, he has resurfaced now. So he's very active with lifelong learning and philanthropy and education, now focusing on his Jack Ma Foundation. I was just in touch with his assistant recently. But yes, that was obviously, also a political move to send so many masks to the Middle East and African countries, none to the United States. So we will see much more of that. But I totally agree with the other speakers, with Xiu Zhou and Dr. Abdelaziz, on the fact that China will do business, but not politics. There will be non-interference, non-involvement into any political issues, unless there is a shift of power and balance of power, or any drastic outburst of a conflict, but otherwise it will be status quo for sure.
Thank you. Yahya, any additions?
Yeah. Thank you, Martina. China's health, the diplomacy itself, I have argued, dates back to the 50s, since the foundation of the People's Republic of China. And the first medical team was in Algeria in 1963, as some historians would tell you. However, if you look today, what we may call the health Silk Road is an intrinsic part of the Belt and Road. And it also serves not only the soft power of China, but it's also a way of, it's part of its trying to reshape the multilateral institutions, namely in this particular case, playing a big role in the World Health Organization, for instance, but it applies to other institutions where China is not, all evidence shows that China has no interest in undoing the liberal order or the institutions that were set up after World War II, but at the same time, it wants to be in some leading roles in some of those institutions and change them, the multilateral institutions. And today, with people here in the West, where I live and so on, they call it the vaccine diplomacy after calling it the mask diplomacy and so on and so forth. But really, it's a part of a policy. It's not mask diplomacy. You can name it that way, but it's something that has evolved along the years and has been in the making for quite some time. They have been, in fact, if you look at all the official documents in China, right after the pronouncement by Xi Jinping about the Belt and Road, you saw publications on the health dimensions of that silk, of what China, what kind of role it would play. And this is what it's trying to do today in making the vaccine, for instance, available to developing countries and so on and so forth, which it wants to identify with. It wants to identify with the developing world as being one of the leaders of the developing world. And I think I saw a question, I don't know if it's our Fatma Zahra, ours, about Morocco. Yeah. And you look today, even with this vaccine thing, it would be made in Egypt, for instance, and possibly in Morocco, and again in Algeria. There's this kind of South-South cooperation that China has tried to promote.
Thank you, Yahya. A question for, I believe, the economist in the room, which is, I think, Dr. Abdelaziz. If you're still with us, we can't see you.
Yes, I am still with you.
Oh, you're with us. So the question is, this may be less relevant for Saudi and the Gulf states, despite the low reservation wages for non-nationals. But thinking about the Turkeys of this world, the Egypts, the Moroccos. If we do see a sort of reconfiguration of supply chains going forward in this post-pandemic space, and not reshoring but nearshoring, do you think we can see some benefits in the textile space and, if you like, low value add assembly, etc., in the Tangiers and in Egypt and so on? Do you see potential for that?
Yes, and I was listening to Yahya's presentation before. I think there is great untapped potential in non-GCC countries. Now, most of China's trade is with the GCC because of oil, but also because we have a bigger market. But I think there's great potential for integrating production processes in different areas as China moves its production system in a way to higher levels of production. I think they will be looking for places to locate some of the production processes, but also I think untapped potential for market. I mean, something we noticed in our engagement with North Africa, the orientation towards Europe doesn't really make a lot of sense economically anymore, but it's still there. Now, if the Chinese or the GCC, I think, are able to break that monopoly in a way, I think there's great market in North Africa and in the rest of Africa as well. With, I think, with rising costs of European products and improving quality of Chinese products, I think we may be able to see some opening there greater than what it is now. Thank you.
Before I go to sort of, I'm going to sort of take the liberty of going, if it's okay with everybody, a couple of minutes over. But what I'd like to do is two final questions and a mini experiment. I always like to try to be a contrarian when possible. Used to get in trouble at school. We have 88 participants. I'm going to ask all of them to, in the chat box, just put the word good or bad. And the question is China a force for good in MENA on aggregate? Very generalist question. Is China a force for good in MENA? Good, bad, and we can tally them up perhaps, and maybe in our future travels we'll tell you the answers. Good or bad? Now the last couple of questions and very quick answers, if I may, if you may. One of them is around is from Samir Shawa, a very interesting question. MENA is a construct, right? It's a linguistic geography or whatever you want to call it. The Horn of Africa is a very important part of BRI. Arguably, Saudi is, of course, well, Saudi is a Red Sea country. UAE, through its investments, its constellation of investments, is a de facto Horn country. And of course, Egypt. The question is, China is heavily involved in Africa with huge investments in Sudan and Ethiopia. Now there is an escalating conflict between them on borders and the dam, which Trump hinted that Egypt should destroy it. Where does China stand on this? Does Juzu want to come in, or does anybody out? I know, please, Juzu.
Yeah, actually, if we say Egypt is old friend of China, it's not exaggerating to say Ethiopia is one of the best friend of China in Africa. So people are always praising that Ethiopia is importing China model for economic growth. So that is why early last year, the Egyptian government was very frustrated when they're asking Chinese support in the UN to vote, for the Egyptian cases against the Ethiopia on the dam. So China is definitely right now want to keep a neutral position because both sides are friends of China. But I think the situation is changing slightly. That is because the internal changes inside the Ethiopia, because the previous administrations, I think from 1990s to like the 3 years ago, those administrations are very pro-China, and the political model is very similar to Chinese. But right now there's a kind of a regime change, and many Chinese projects have been sabotaged. And also, the Chinese project is not going very well because there is a political reason of that. I think maybe in the future, China's position will slightly in favor of Egypt, but we don't know.
Thank you, Juzu. I asked colleagues to sort of put the good or bad word in chat. In fact, it should go in the Q&A the Q&A function. So just good or bad. And to that end, we're going to end with a philosophical question from Zaid Belbaji in I believe in London. He's I think a fellow columnist of Arab News, Dr. Abdulaziz, and he states that he wrote last week that trade with China is an opportunity for MENA countries to determine their future rather than be observers to global trends. So do the experts think this is an opportune moment in this regard? And in your sort of final 30 to 45 second summary, if you could state whether you think China can play an even more constructive role, or the current trajectory is just fine as it is. We'll start the other way. We'll start on the reverse. Dr. Juzu.
Sorry, I just skipped the question. Sorry, what is the question?
I mean, for you, it's I think you can only give one answer. Can China do more in the region, or is it okay as it is? And there was a specific question about MENA countries. If you can put the scholarly hat on and take the Chinese hat off, can MENA countries determine their future rather than be observers to global trends through their engagement with China?
I think it definitely is, because the MENA country is the center of the Islamic world. If you compare, if you think now is a new Cold War or potential Cold War between the West and the East, the Islamic world is definitely the world in between. So it is definitely one of the maybe the major determining forces in the future for the global order. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Juzu. Yahya.
I think the way I see it, yes, it is an opportunity. And I think the MENA countries have understood, regardless of their traditional alliances, in the case of the GCC, like Dr. Abdulaziz said, but they will go where the opportunities are. And they are serious about diversifying because it's very important for them. I'm going to take the liberty of giving a small example. And I think this would be this would be the wrong policy of the United States to pursue when Dr. Mark, now I forgot his name, Esper, when he took a tour of some African and Middle East and North African countries by encouraging them or discouraging them from maintaining good relations with China. I think this was wrong, because I take the example, a few days after his visit to the Maghreb, Algeria, there was a big delegation that came from China to Algeria to sign important agreements and so on and so forth, which was a response to say, we can do business with whoever we want. And so, I think without changing, as I said, without changing where, your relations with the EU or with the United States, you want to have this sort of renewal of non-alignment that existed in the 1960s or what have you. It's more opportunities, and China can offer a lot of opportunities, whether it's in the infrastructure sector, whether it's the price of commodities, and more importantly, I believe, now it's competitive in terms of technology. You take the example of Huawei in the Maghreb countries, where it's building, the 5G, where you have training programs within Huawei, where you have students or rather engineers going to China to get trained in new technologies and so on. So I think they see it as a great opportunity.
Thank you, Yahya. It's quite incredible that we've had a China-MENA event without the word debt trap as myth or reality coming up. So congratulations, but I mentioned it anyway as a footnote. And also quite incredible that we didn't touch on this military outpost in Djibouti, but I'm sure we'll have conversations in the future. Martina, last thoughts?
Business opportunity for sure. China's economy was one of the only economies to expand last year by 2.3%, the biggest major economy to see growth this year. The IMF forecast 7.9% for China. So definitely there will be many, many more economic opportunities. Wishful thinking, but I hope there will also be more humanitarian assistance from China for countries like Yemen, for example, more people-to-people exchange, helping the young generation, especially. Ta'awun cooperation is very important in both cultures. So I hope to see much more of that in the future.
Thank you, Martina. Postal reconstruction, a very interesting topic. Last word from the panel to Dr. Abdulaziz.
Thank you. No, I think there is potential for greater growth in trade and investment. China is a big market for us, and I think the GCC also provides a hospitable place for investment. As I mentioned in the beginning, trade with China multiplied 90 times, actually, 90 times from 1990 to 2020. There is no other example. Now they're our number one trading partner, and I expect that to grow, even that trade to grow. There is one element I think is very important. We have now about 1,000 students from the GCC in China. It's actually a decline from 1,500 or 1,600 a couple of years ago. You know, I met them in Beijing 2 years ago, met some of them. The number one difficulty for them was learning Chinese. Now Saudi Arabia has taken the decision to teach Chinese here in schools, in all public schools. So I think as we break the language barriers, I think that will open up to greater exchanges, trade exchanges. And next, I think as China also takes on, we hope, a more active role diplomatically in addressing the Gulf security. I think the more they can be effective here also in trade and investment and arms trade, and I think in all the other aspects. There is now this question that's always raised about China-Iran relationship, and the Iranians said last year that they had a draft agreement on strategic partnership for 25 years. We asked the Chinese about it, and they said it was much ado about nothing, but we would like to see more on that aspect, that China is actually taking a more principled position regarding aggression by Iran. Thank you. When we talk about Gulf security, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about protecting the Gulf from Iranian aggressions, whether against shipping or against countries that are there on the basically GCC countries.
We must do this again and get an Iranian perspective for the future. But in the meantime, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Juzu, Professor Yahya, Martina, Dr. Abdulaziz for wonderful perspectives, insights, thoughts. And last but not least, before I pass on to Steve, I'd like to thank the audience, but also the CMED team, Salome, Samar, Emily, and Manny, and last but not least to Dr. Steve Spiegel. And of course, I thank the audience for incredible questions. And my last word is my guesstimate from the good versus bad, China for good versus bad. From what I can see, it's probably 85% good. That's my non-quantitative guesstimate. Shukran jazil. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Spiegel.
Over to you, Steve.
Thank you. What a fabulous session. And it's the first time we've tried it with so many speakers from so many different areas simultaneously, and it really worked. And so we had different perspectives, but with a lot of agreement as well from all these different places. We've got to do this again. I really want to stress, and of course, thanks to Adil, who set it all up, found the great speakers, put it together, and it worked. I also want to thank our amazing staff who run our event so smoothly. Manny Jad, our deputy director, Salome Mohajer, project manager, Summer Mesmi, the research and social media manager, and Emily Pistol, our center associate. I'm not used to giving their last names. And I do want to thank our team. When at the outset, I couldn't be seen, they figured out how to resurrect that problem. CMED has several other events forthcoming that we hope you won't want to miss. Our office will be in touch with you with the details. I always am amazed after one of these sessions that this can be done and be done so effectively. So we'll zoom in, and until then, our very best, and hope everyone takes care so that they are not harmed by the coronavirus. And we also want to thank in particular our participant for whom it's about 1:40 a.m. In the morning. So let me say, wherever you're going, back to sleep, to breakfast, to lunch, or dinner. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.